So My Last Duchess is an amazingly, terrifyingly creepy poem by Robert Browning, who's a Victorian poet born in 1812 and died in 1889. He's kind of born into like a comfortably middle-class family, married fellow poet Elizabeth Barrett, and he's best known for his dramatic monologues, of which My Last Duchess is one. You can kind of tell because it's got "my" in the title, right? Tips you off. It might be in the first person, therefore might be a monologue. So it's basically just a speech in a particular character's voice. And part of the point is the character of the speaker, right? In some poems, there's an I who delivers the poem, but the focus is much more on the subject matter than it is on the speaker. But in a monologue, part of the fun is kind of figuring out, who is this guy? What is he talking about? Is he, is he being honest with us? All of those are kind of more questions that come up in stuff like this. This particular dramatic monologue, thought to be spoken by 16th century Italian Duke of Ferrara, who is a real dude. He married a daughter of the Medici family named Lucrezia when she was only 13 years old. Oh my god, that's so young. And by the time she was 17, she was dead, and he'd abandoned her a year before that. So he's not such a great dude, it seems like. And the poem is kind of structured around him talking about a painting of his last duchess, or Lucrezia, who's now dead. And the Duke of Ferrara was a real dude, and this painting is thought to be a real painting of Lucrezia that exists. You can look at it. And since the poem's pretty short, we're going to go through it kind of line by line, and we're going to talk it through and kind of talk about how the character of this guy emerges and how we get a very creepy feeling as it goes along. So here we go. That's my last duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. I call that piece a wonder now. Fra Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands. Will't please you sit and look at her? Right, so the Duke is talking to a yet unknown person, we don't know who this person is, showing off the painting of his last duchess, which hangs on the wall. Fra Pandolf, we can assume, is the painter, who he describes as sort of working for a day to paint the portrait. And it's interesting how he kind of begins to describe the painting as his wife, right? There she stands, and wilt it please you sit and look at her? We know she's dead, looking as if she were alive, he mentions. He talks about her as if she were here, as if the painting were just her. Goes on. I said Fra Pandolf by design, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth of passion of its earnest glance, but to myself they turn, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I, and seemed as they would ask me, if they durst, how such a glance came there. So, not the first, are you to turn and ask thus. This is a little roundabout way of saying this, but he's basically saying that he's specifying the artist of Fra Pandolf because strangers always ask him how someone could have captured the depth and passion of its earnest glance, and Fra Pandolf is really good at it. He also points out that since he's always there when people see the painting, people always ask him this, and he reveals that he keeps it covered behind a curtain, which is kind of worrisome right there, right? If you have a portrait of your dead wife, why would you cover it up behind a curtain? If it's because it's upsetting, why do you show it to strangers? I don't know. The mystery deepens. Sir, 'twas not her husband's present only called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek. Perhaps Fra Pandolf chanced to say, her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much, or paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half-flush that dies along her throat. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. Here we start to get a hint of the answer of what the Duke's relationship to his wife might be. He's commenting on the fact that she's kind of lit up with joy, not only at his presence, but kind of at any compliment. So the painting captures her true joy and beauty because she reveals it to just about anyone, including the painter, right? That spot of joy on her cheek isn't just like dependent on her husband being there. She had a heart, how will I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. Sir, 'twas all one, my favor at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, the bough of cherries some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode around the terrace, all and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush at least. And here he kind of starts to elaborate on the problem, right? She's just too happy. And he's not the only one that makes her happy. His favors, some stupid cherries, the mule she rode around on, like all of these things make her happy and make her smile. and, make her heart glad. And so this guy is kind of sounding like a terrible, terrible person, right? A jealous, awful guy. And having such an unlikable speaker is really interesting, right? And it's not something we get in just your kind of normal, like, speaker describing stuff kind of poem. Dramatic monologue, again, it's kind of making it a game to figure out what's really going on with this guy. She thanked men, good, but thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900 years old name with anybody's gift. And you kind of get this like revision and stuttering, right? The break for I know not how, right? Tells us we're getting to something important. He's having a hard time articulating this. And, and we're getting to something important. We see that he thinks she should be grateful to him for getting a 900 years old name. We can surmise maybe that her name isn't as old as his, nor not really as grand. And so her offense, right, of thanking everybody the same, is even more egregious, right, because she owes him her station in life. That's what he's implying. And the she thanked men part kind of tells us it's not just about her being happy, right? It's about him thinking she's being flirtatious with lots of other men. Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling, even had you skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear to such a one, and say, just this or that, and you disgust me. Here you miss, or there you exceed the mark. And if she let herself be lessoned so, nor plainly set her wits to yours, forsooth, and made excuse, e'en then there would be some stooping, and I choose never to stoop. This is a little difficult to parse, right? What's the stooping? It kind of seems like what he's saying is that he thinks it's beneath him to criticize her, like to tell her what she's doing wrong. So even if he were just to frankly say, like, I like this and I don't like this, he still thinks that that would be stooping and he wouldn't do it. He's above that. So she has no idea that he is displeased, and he thinks that that's her fault too, probably. Oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, whenever I passed her. But who passed without much the same smile? This grew, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. There she stands, as if alive. Whoa, this is getting sinister, right? We get the final rearticulation of the problem. She smiles the same smile to everyone. What are these commands that stop the smile? We don't really know, but it seems important that it's quickly followed by there she stands, as if alive. Can we assume that these commands in some way led to the stopping of the smiles and the ultimate demise of the young wife? It's a little ambiguous. Robert Browning later clarified that he does kind of mean it in a sinister way. Those commands are not good commands. So it goes on. The poem's not done yet. Will't please you rise? We'll meet the company below then. I repeat, the count your master's known munificence is ample warrant that no just pretense of mine for dowry will be disallowed, though his daughter's fair self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. Right, now we understand who the listener is. He's a servant of this count, whose daughter the Duke of Ferrara is planning on marrying next. And he clarifies, right, he's going to be getting a large dowry, but then insists that his fair daughter's self is the true object of, or his, the true thing that he wants. So this shift from probably killed my first wife to so let's talk about preparations for marrying my second is really chilling. And now we get to the end, and nay, we'll go down together, sir. Notice Neptune, though, taming a seahorse, thought a rarity, which Claus of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. And that's the end. And it pretty much seals the deal that the Duke of Ferrara is a sociopath, right? Because after showing this painting of his dead wife, who he may or may not have ordered killed, then he just shows off another piece of art, as if they're just the same significance. She's just another object to be appreciated. And do you remember, right, how he described the next potential wife? He said, though his daughter's fair self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. Right? He means object as my intention or my goal. He doesn't mean it literally. But it hardly seems a coincidence, right, that this conversation is taking place clearly in a gallery of objects. He's got the painting, he's got the bronze of, Neptune taming a seahorse or whatever. And it's interesting then to look back on his description of what made him so jealous. In this light of kind of looking at objects and looking at material things, right, his favor at her breast, makes her smile as much as the sunset, a bough of cherries, her white mule. It's kind of striking how those latter things are things that you can touch or see, right, whereas favor at her breast is totally abstract. What is that? He's being super vague. And would you expect a 13-year-old, again, remember, she's 13 years old, would you expect a 13-year-old to understand the significance of this like abstract idea of nobility in this name? No, but she does understand these material objects. Um, we also don't really know how the favor at her breast manifested itself. We already know he's not a nice guy. But so it kind of seems like he's basically punished her for appreciating material things more than non-material things by turning her into a material thing, right? The artists, Frau Pandolf and Claus of Innsbruck, are named with equal importance as their work, which kind of even further reduces the significance of the actual subject of the work, right? His wife, or Neptune, in favor of the resulting object, which is sort of crafted by the artist, right? It's the artist and the object, not so much the subject, that's important, at least to him, it seems like. It's a cool poem, right? It's like awesome. And I bet you didn't even notice that the whole thing is in rhyming couplets. Oh, I just like scoot back up and just like take a look. It totally is, and it's because Browning is like a master of speech. He knows how people talk, and he's able to make this poem sound so natural that you don't notice the unnatural kind of artifice, right? The rhyming. You don't notice that it's a poem, essentially. And that dovetails really nicely with the subject matter, right? We're blurring the lines between reality and art, right? Between speech and poetry. We don't notice that it's in couplets. And the woman and the painting and the artist are kind of all the same thing. So this guy's just a genius. I love Robert Browning. So that's basically what you should take away. We're just gonna, again, what happens in the poem is just a dramatic monologue spoken by the Duke of Ferrara, 16th century Italian dude, talking to kind of an emissary from the count whose daughter he wants to marry next. Shows him a painting of his first wife, now deceased, hidden behind a curtain. Describes that she was just too easily pleased by, and too flirtatious, and this offended him. But he wouldn't stoop to actually telling her anything was wrong, and so he gave commands, and then the smile stopped altogether. Though we're not positive the commands led to her death, we might be able to assume it from context. Then he goes creepily back to business, discussing the dowry and showing another work of art, and as if that's kind of all his last touches was to him. So the differences between sort of the material and the abstract and the real and the artistic really play heavily in this poem, and Browning's expert ear for speech makes us forget the whole thing's in rhyming couplets.